it's not about where was your, you have it under somewhere else, your background. So I remember I found your, okay, I can actually do that. I can definitely do that. No problem. Sure, sure, sure. 5 more minutes? We have about 40 people signed up, so I'm sure that there are gonna be a few more coming in. Certainly, if we don't have, so 3 more minutes, and then we can do the introductions. Brand new building. We still have the tags. And I always carry my glasses here in my wallet. And they're indestructible. I'll send you the link for this. But no, they destroy them. They destroy them. If you destroy them, they send you free. Without these, I'm done. He calls me the Peter Rabbit right now. All right, everybody. So very informal, very informal. Thank you for making the time to be here. It is one of those rare opportunities to have a worldwide leader and person who's made an impact at a global scale to have him on the University of Cincinnati campus. And we were very fortunate to actually have had the chance to invite Mr. Rupert Scofield to come on our campus. The main event is going to happen tonight at Xavier University at Cintas Center. But then we have some friends, we have some common connections and everything else, and they said, we may be able to pull them off for a couple of hours. Would you like to have us? Like, will I ever? It's really rare, as I said, because situations like this don't happen every day. We're able to have him on in Cincinnati. It's the first time he came to Cincinnati. And so he arrived this morning at 5 o'clock. He's a little bit tired. But, so thank you for making the time. This is, again, I would like to, and as I said, very informal. I would like all of you to start thinking some of the questions, especially coming from someone who's been involved in microfinance and then social entrepreneurship at a global scale with 20 countries? Yeah. 20 countries on 5 continents. So quick review, and I'm going to present our speaker for the day. It's actually not just a speaker, but someone to interact with. So we're going to have plenty of time to do this, probably 15, 20 minutes, 25 minutes for Mr. Scofield to tell you his story and his background, and then we're going to open up for questions and answers. We have microphones and everything. So anyway, nearly 4 decades ago, Rupert Scofield co-founded microfinance pioneer FINCA International, as you probably saw in the invitations. FINCA scaled around the world, so too did microfinance. Rupert learned that what it took to start, build and run one of the original social enterprises. But he also learned another invaluable lesson: to alleviate poverty in this generation. It was going to take an ecosystem of social enterprises that improved the lives worldwide. In this talk, Rupert will share why social enterprises are needed now more than ever to address the world's pressing development challenges. He'll ground this in first-hand experience of not only building and running a global social enterprise, but also becoming an investor in early-stage social enterprises through FINCA Ventures. Rupert will address the network effect of social enterprises and how social enterprise initiatives grew out of his recognition that access to basic services require financial inclusion and that both are essential to poverty alleviation.
You're giving away too much.
Oh, okay. Sorry, guys.
What am I going to do?
All right, so we have a quick speaker bio, okay? He co-founded global microfinance pioneer FINCA International in 1984. He has served as president and CEO since 1994. He now leads the organization supporting the rise of social enterprises, delivering basic service and financial innovation global-wide. An agricultural economist and microfinance, social enterprise and impact investing expert, Rupert is the author, as an author, podcast presenter, and speaker, offering insights on market-based solutions to global poverty. So let's give a warm welcome to Mr. Rupert Scofield.
The mic is hot. Okay, good. All right, so actually I need to add something. So I am going to be giving a TED Talk in 2 weeks at Oxford and on this exact thing. So this is going to be a dry run. So I'm going to need you guys to pretend instead of you being from Cincinnati, you're some of these Oxford guys, Etonians, you know, who are skeptical of everything. You know, think David Cameron, Boris Johnson, okay? But younger, you know, that's who you guys are. So I'm going to give you 3 seconds to get into character, all right? So get ready to put on your big, haughty, skeptical faces. You know, who is this dude, you know, taking up our valuable classroom time? Okay, so let's wind it down. 3, 2, 1, go. Okay, all right, so now I've got to get in character. Okay, so I'm going to, I doubt that I've mastered this whole thing, so indulge me. I'm probably going to have to go here to my crib sheet now and then, but anyway, this is the way it starts. There are pivotal moments in the journey of every social entrepreneur to eventual success. Some are, wow, this thing really works moments, where you stand in awe of the audacity and brilliance of your own idea and action. Others are dope moments when you stand paralyzed with dread, considering for the first time, maybe I'm actually not going to be able to pull this off. Let's do audacity and brilliance first, okay? So in 1989, I'm standing on the shoulder of El Volcán de Agua, the water volcano in Guatemala. Guatemala is a beautiful country, very popular with tourists, but I'm there because I created a social enterprise called FINCA to ameliorate poverty, and this is where the business has brought me. I'm standing in an adobe tile-roofed house on the slope of the volcano, meeting with the Guatemalan women members of the village bank, quizzing them as to how successful their businesses are going. Some of them are seamstresses creating colorful clothing to sell to the tourists. Others make ceramic bowls and plates. Others prepare and sell food in the marketplace. Part of our methodology is to require that the women save 20% of the loans we grant them. And I want to see if they're complying with this. So, have you been able to put away any savings? The women nod. I don't know whether they're actually telling me just what I want to know. Can I see it? Can you show it to me? The women then break into their indigenous dialect, which they don't realize I learned as a Peace Corps volunteer. They're saying, "Can we trust this gringo?" Apparently I have an honest face, because they pull up this carpet, and from the floorboards comes this huge lard can. They pry the lid off, and the money flies out just like a jack-in-the-box. So I studied economics at university. Today, I'm a recovering economist. So this moment in Guatemala, with the lard can filled to the brim with hundreds of dollars in Guatemalan currency, is a brilliant example of what my economics professor would have called capital formation. This money would not have existed had not some intrepid social enterprise trekked out to this remote community to test its somewhat crazy concept, which today we call micro-enterprise. In this moment, I knew we were really onto something. As the years passed, we eventually went to 20 countries on 5 continents and had millions of clients. I had my, wow, this thing really works moment. But what happened about those times where we didn't actually succeed in solving all of our customers' problems? I had an experience years ago that stayed with me and which made me realize the importance of delivering key services to remote, vulnerable communities. The person who brought this most clearly to me was a Ugandan entrepreneur called Naima. Naima was our most successful client, not just in Uganda, but in our entire microfinance network. Before we met Naima, she was the sole supporter of her 7 daughters in the eastern Ugandan town of Jinja, cleaning people's houses and begging for their scraps to feed her daughters and doing her laundry in their dirty dishwater. Naima had a friend who recommended to her, why don't you go to a village bank meeting and get a loan and start a business of your own? Naima took her friend's advice. She borrowed some money, and soon she was doing business in the marketplace, buying and selling vegetables. But Naima was very entrepreneurial, and by the time I met her years later, she had built a very successful business which eventually grew to a size that could employ her and her 7 daughters full time. Hang on one sec. This is not going to happen 2 weeks from now. Trust me. Don't worry about it. So okay. So start fruits and vegetables at the same market. Okay. She also was able to educate her daughters to the level of university and finance their education. On top of that, she was able to buy a piece of land in the town and build a house on it of her own. Naima's amazing journey was proof that capital alone had the power to help people escape poverty. Or did it? Years later, on a trip to Uganda to check on our micro-enterprise operation, I asked after Naima and how she was doing. Oh, Mr. Scofield, it's a sad story. First, Naima's mother fell ill. She gave her restaurant to the care of one of her daughters, and her daughter was not as capable as her, and the business failed. Then Naima herself fell ill with breast cancer. An unscrupulous doctor took all her money, left her uncured and mutilated. Oh, Mr. Scofield, we're very worried for her. I was saddened by this news and stunned to think that our most successful client in the entire network had fallen off the ladder out of poverty due to a lack of access to effective health care. Come on, Rupert. Okay. This experience vividly showed to me how people everywhere need access to capital and savings, but they also need access to quality, effective social services like health care, energy, sanitation, to name a few. I ordered my staff in Naima, I ordered my staff to hire Naima as a brand ambassador to promote village banking to other Ugandan women. Then I had my staff mobilize and look for a more integrated solution to poverty. No single social enterprise, charity, or idea has the power to solve all of the world's problems. Ultimately, we need an ecosystem of social entrepreneurs working together to reduce poverty on a grand scale and to successfully address our foremost development challenges. We also need a new generation of social entrepreneurs with the courage to chase their ideas and the knowledge to start, build, and run an enterprise. That's what I intend to convey to you today. Social enterprise is a sexy term these days, but what does it really mean? Well, a social enterprise has a sustainable business model, and it employs market-based approaches. We would never have reached the point of dispersing over $1 billion in loans annually had we used a strictly philanthropic approach. Social enterprises generate revenue, access capital, and leverage it to further their mission. They go at the problems from the market, testing their products and services on real world clients and coming up with solutions that really work. This brings us back to the first part of this thing. So what's the difference between a social enterprise and a regular for-profit business? The simple answer is a social enterprise wouldn't exist had it not been that someone was really determined to solve a large social problem. A social enterprise isn't just about profits. It's also about a mission to make a measurable improvement in some social good. The mission can be broad, like ending world poverty, or focused on simply improving the productivity of crops of small shareholder farmers in sub-Saharan Africa through delivering more accurate tropical weather forecasting. All right, so you've spotted a problem, you've got an idea how to solve it, and you want to bring it to market. But how do you turn your idea into an actual business? The team you bring to your mission is vitally important. In our case, our team put in writing what we sought from the mission and what we brought to the mission. We were hilariously misaligned. One of us wanted to give away all our profits, another one wanted to make some money, and as for me, well, I had a family to support, but I also really loved the actual work we were doing. It was tremendously inspiring. The diversity in these goals made our enterprise stronger. You need the hardcore mission people, but you also need someone to keep the lights on and pay the rent. As my first CFO told me, Rupert, you do the mission. I'll keep you solvent. This brings us to the next stage, financing your enterprise. Some entrepreneurs, lots of them, do bootstrapping, but at some point, if you want to scale your program, then you may want to consider opening up your business to investor capital. Even people who are attracted to your business, if your business involves customers that are low income and live in emerging markets, you may have trouble getting their support. Traditional investors see social enterprises as very risky, and this leads us to what we call the pioneer gap in early stage funding. Some other people will tell you, come back to me and ask me for money when you've already proved out your concept. So if you're a young social entrepreneur, you need to think about and survive the death valley of investing. The most important trait for an entrepreneur is persistence. You'll think of it, Rupert, just persist. You have to be ready over and over again to have people tell you, that idea won't work, or that idea's been tried and failed. Skepticism is a real obstacle. I can remember my partner in a moment of enormous frustration after months of trying to raise money, gritting his teeth and saying, I am so pissed these people won't support us, Rupert. Most importantly, you need to listen to your customers and their needs. If you can get customers to trust you, then they will give you honest answers about what they like about your product and what they don't like. How do you get them to trust you? Well, a crusty old union guy from Texas named Al Moore gave me the secret. Rupert, if the people think you really care about them, they'll trust you and they will do anything to help you succeed. Okay. It can be discouraging if your idea doesn't work straight out of the gate. But if you can get honest feedback from your customers, keep perfecting the product until the criticism stops. Another important lesson that I learned is that you need to be cognizant that over time, the needs of your customers may change. If they change a lot, you may have to change your product a lot. For instance, we've expanded beyond just finance into clean energy. We set up a company to sell and distribute solar lanterns and clean cook stoves. These are products that really move the needle on poverty alleviation and on improving the quality of life of our customers. One way to see if your products are really working is if your customers smile a lot. In fact, one of my early employees in Uganda said, Rupert, I can sum up FINCA in one sentence, in one phrase even. It's the smiles on the faces of the women. I still use that. I like it. In recent years, through our impact investing initiative, which gives early stage capital to startup social enterprises, we've come to know a lot of really visionary young entrepreneurs from all corners of the world. These are people who went to the top universities, who could easily be working for Google or Amazon or NASA or the UK Space Agency or the big finance or healthcare companies. They chose instead to devise solutions to the problems of people who live in poverty in their home countries. They, okay, all of these talented entrepreneurs have one thing in common. They put their customers at the center of the practical solutions they're creating. When I started out, we didn't have the nomenclature of disruption, pivoting, or proof of concept. Today, there's a growing ecosystem to support social entrepreneurs with training and finance and other kinds of support. There are great accelerators in lots of different countries which equip social entrepreneurs with practical knowledge, connect them to mentors, and ongoing advisory groups, plus seed capital so they can get their business from point A to point B faster. As I learned from Naima, there's no one social enterprise or product that by itself is going to end poverty. Ultimately, what's going to be needed is an ecosystem of social entrepreneurs working together and other people working on the social services that they need to remain less vulnerable. We actually need a second revolution, which I think is going to be bigger than microfinance was, to bring more people and more ideas into the fray. Finally, I want to share the big secret of this line of work. Now, your friends and family will tell you you'd have to be a bit, well, maybe totally crazy to enter this field. They'll warn you this is going to require great sacrifice, and at the end of it, you may not have a lot of personal wealth to show for it. Well, it's going to require sacrifice and a lot of hard work. But at the end of it, you will find that you led a life but in the end, you'll find you have led the most rewarding, useful, satisfying life that you could have ever imagined. Thank you. All right. So we need work. We need work. This is, what's that?
Want to do it again?
No, thank you. I'm going to do it again tonight. That's enough. Yeah. Yeah. A bumpy warm-up.
So Matt,
Oh,
we're
thank you.
good, right? We can actually just again. Do we continue with the recording, or do you want to just stop here and then open up for questions and answers? Do you want, so Elizabeth, would you like to keep on running? Okay, all right. So we've heard from Mr. Scofield. A lot of one of the things that we were discussing today is just in my experience as an instructor and working with young generation, and the discovery that the younger generation, especially at your age, your students, young students, are much more socially involved, and then related to the social, the sustainability, okay? And the social norms. You are probably, and from my observation, and I am one of the biggest fans of your generation, where you guys are definitely much more attuned to the needs of the global social revolution, as well as sustainability, and then saving whatever can be saved in relationship to global issues, nature, Mother Nature, and so on and so forth. So this is why I wanted to kind of like expose Mr. Scofield to you, as well as your needs and your comments in relationship to what he's been doing. So if some of you have been inspired by his speech and what his work is doing, then feel free to just, again, challenge him and then learn from his experience and everything else. Also share with him some of the ideas and some of the things that you may want to implement and do with your future going forward, especially if you're going the direction of social entrepreneurship, community involvement, nonprofits, and so on and so forth. Okay, we have two microphones. We can open up to all of you. if you have any questions, anything that you want to ask. I'm going to ask my assistants here to do the runners. And everything else, so go ahead, Martin. That's one, and then Kyle, I'm going to give you the second one. They both work. So we have a question here, right? If you want to introduce yourself, because it's good for Mr. Scofield to see exactly who is your audience, his audience is. If you want to introduce yourselves, college, major, whatever, or interest, or wherever you're coming from, so he can know exactly who's talking.
Okay. Hi, everyone. My name is Mariam. I come from Pakistan. I came to the US 2 years ago. I'm doing my MBA here. So FINCA International is basically in Pakistan as well. And I was privileged enough to got a job offer from there as well. But what happened was, as you guys are saying, it's very challenging. So the conditions out there in developing countries, it's easier said than done. That we are like socially responsible. That's how our generation is. But some dynamics are really hard for us to work there, no matter how much we are like supported there financially as well. So, and then like conditions like where like social like culture restrictions, especially women, and then there are restrictions. Not every woman could go outside and work. And I had to for my 6 weeks trainings, I had to like go into their houses individually to see how they were doing. They were like sewing clothes on like in-house sewing machines. So, and then, it wasn't that easy for them as well to like get it, like finance as well. So like what your work is, again, my question here is just to set the story up, is like how your workers or how your people are like trying in countries like Pakistan, or maybe like, I don't know, other countries who are facing these problems where women are not like, like especially like, low class income bracket, women are not like able to like go outside their houses and like work openly.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, it's, believe it or not, yeah, it is definitely challenging in Pakistan. I would say even maybe more challenging in like Afghanistan, where we basically had to do all the work through women credit officers going in to the homes of one of the women in the village bank, and they do the village bank meeting in the house. But even doing the business, the women were not allowed to go out to the markets on their own. They always had to be accompanied by a man. So they would and a family member, I might add. So they often just said, well, you know what, I'll have my husband do the actual sales. We'll produce the cloth or the blouses or whatever, and the man will take them out, and that's his job, to sell them in the marketplace. And yeah, every culture presents its challenges. Latin America had a lot of, frankly, violence, domestic violence. There's kind of this machismo culture where the men can feel threatened by a powerful woman. And sometimes the village bank had to get together and rescue a woman from her husband. And there were women that got kicked out of the community because they were abusing their wives. And in Africa, there's other challenges. It's a difficult aspect of the culture for us to decipher is the tribal relationships. And sometimes we discover that 100% of our employees were with one tribe. We didn't even know it, but that's what was going on. They're basically hiring friends, family, people that they knew had some kind of allegiance to the same tribe. So I guess to me, this is also part of what makes the work so interesting. It is challenging, and if you talk to somebody like Muhammad Yunus, who's a towering figure in microfinance, another pioneer, he basically took on the culture of Bangladesh, and he said, some things I don't agree with. There should not be dowries, that's something that hurts the economy of the family long term. And so he didn't make any bones about it, that he was opposed to it. Of course, he was a Bengali, so he could say something like that. somebody who's an outsider could never criticize the culture. So you have to learn how to navigate it. But thank you for your service, and I hope one day you'll go back and
That's the plan.
and you'll actually run the bank in Pakistan.
That's the plan.
Oh, hello everybody. My name is Daniel. I'm an international student from Germany. I'm a second-year student majoring in econ and business analytics. And what you said really resonated with me with the whole sustainability aspect, and what you also said with our generation being very active in that. What I want to do, my goal, or maybe even my dream, is to go into sustainable strategy, so corporate strategy, kind of fuse the principle of sustainability with my knowledge of economics and strategy and consulting. And my question is, you talked a lot about the cultural differences already, overcoming cultural hurdles. Would you mind sharing what some of the legal barriers were, and how did you overcome those?
Well,
exactly. That's why we want to know.
well, interestingly enough, in the early days, that's what I just loved about the work, because we were still small, we were below the legal radar, and even when we started to rise above it, and the central bankers would say, "Hey, you're like capturing savings, you know, you can't do that." And they'd say, and then they'd think and they go, "Yeah, but we actually like what you're doing. We're not going to do it, and you're doing a great job at it, so keep doing it, and we'll let you know when it's time to lower the regulatory boom." And boy, did they ever, you know. I mean, it was more challenging to do all the stuff we wanted to do. And I remember when, you know, I was telling this commercial banker from Ecuador, actually worked for Citibank there, and I told him of our plans to transform our financial NGOs into regulated banks, because we had good reasons. We wanted to take savings legally, and we wanted to be able to pay our customers a fair interest rate for the savings they put with us, and we wanted to be able to intermediate it to have more working capital and borrow less money externally in hard currencies, which ultimately became a huge problem for us. That's a whole nother story. But it changes. It changes the game. And of course, the legal systems, let's face it, not just in developing markets, but now even in our country, they're subject to manipulation, corruption, political lobbying, and you know, there's almost it's hard enough for a poor person in this country or in Europe to get justice. It's hard if you don't have the money, if you're outgunned on the other side by you know, someone who has the money to pay a fancy lawyer and pay for a long time and appeal and appeal and appeal and appeal, you know. So in emerging markets as well, boy, I mean, you know, the entire system is rigged against you. And so, you know, sometimes people would rip us off, and we would take them to court, and that we would lose. It was obvious. We had all the evidence. We had a terrible fraud in one country in Latin America where our employees got colluded and ripped off $1 million. We put them in jail for a while, but when they went to trial, we had evidence this high, and our lawyer presented like for 3 days. The judge at the end said, "Okay, let's hear from the defense." And the defender of our crooks said, "The defense rests." Down came the gavel, "You're free to go." So we figure something balanced tipped the scales there. But you know, you persist. You keep going, because at the end of the day, it's worth it, and you do win every now and then, and every win improves the system, the society. So, you know, we keep at it. And we hope one day one of our women village bankers will become president of these countries. And then we hope things will change.
Thank you.
Hello, my name is Joe Guzik. I'm currently a first-year economics and marketing student from Columbus, Ohio. I'm currently researching the effects of volunteer tourism on the local economies in Africa. I was wondering if I could get your opinion on how do you think that the subsidies of these like nonprofits coming into and subsidizing like the clothes market or like the labor market, the construction market are affecting local businesses and affecting employment and like job quality, not just jobs.
So can you give me a more concrete example?
Like buy one, give one to the kid in Africa affected the textile mills, the textile industries in Africa.
Who did? Sorry.
So you buy one shoe, give another one in Africa. That was a whole campaign.
Oh, you mean like the charitable organizations?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. So we had I would say, even more controversial case because we, at one point, were participating in this, what do they call it, food assistance type of aid, where we would get a big tanker load of grain from the U.S. and we would sell it in, say, Ecuador or something. And so we had to make a whole case of how this wasn't messing up, you know, the demand for the local production and so forth. But yeah, I would say, you know, I guess I've got firm views because, you know, we tried to do market-based approaches and do something that would be sustainable long run. And so from the very beginning, really, I began building a business model that depended on the customers paying fair interest rates, not what do you call it, not like loan shark level rates, you know, like 10% a day, but we charged like 3% a month, which would be considered high in this, but like in those countries, our entrepreneurs were paying 10% a month before FINCA showed up. So they received a huge windfall in their profits, and that built kind of a win-win where we were able to cover our operating costs, the salaries of our local staff and so forth. And eventually we were able to build a totally sustainable network that was, starting with our customers, they became more sustainable. And because they were saving money on our loans, I mentioned that, 20% of the loans. They even ended up, I remember the day they came to us and said, wow, you know, we're building up a lot of savings. And some of the people are saying, why don't we put that money to work? And so they actually set up internal banks. We called it the internal account. And they began charging their net borrowers much more than we were, you know, like maybe 15% a month. And they were paying a deposit rate to their net savers. And some of them ended up creating more money than we were lending into that village bank. So it was working really well. And so, you know, I don't think, with all due respect to a charity that wants to do good and is doing good on an individual level, when it comes to like really moving the needle on addressing a big problem like poverty, we believe at least, you know, you need to use market-based incentives that don't kind of distort the whole thing. Because, and let's face it, you don't have the money to take a purely philanthropic approach indefinitely. There's just not enough. I mean, unless the day comes when Bill Gates and Buffett and who's the Mexican guy? Well, anyway, there's a Mexican who's richer than all of them. And until the day he says, okay, I'm gonna give this money to this cause, we're not gonna create enough capital to address it that way.
So I'm Professor Val McCary from the School of Education, and I am interested, is your work completely internationally based, or are you also looking at impoverished areas in the U.S. in different pockets of communities in need?
Yeah, so I think the most oft asked question in our early days when we were going around to Rotary clubs and churches and so forth, that was the question that most often came up. Why don't you do this in the U.S.? Well, we did attempt it, but basically the problem of poverty in the U.S. is not like the problem of poverty in developing countries. In the U.S., people who want to get out of poverty, they want to get a job. They don't want to set up a business. You know, that's too complicated. You have to have skill in marketing, in bookkeeping, in fundraising, in human resources and everything. That's not how people get out of poverty in the U.S. in most cases. You know, they don't start a small business. They try to get a job, paying them a decent salary. Plus, it's not an informal economy here. Most of the people are working for businesses or whatever, or for the government. Whereas in developing countries, it's the opposite. There's only a small percentage of the GDP that comes out of the formal sector businesses, you know, multinational and so forth. And then 80% of the people live day to day, going into the markets and slugging it out and trying to figure out how to live one day to the next.
Thank you.
Rupert, there's a lot of people in this room that are trying to think about what they're going to be doing in the next, 4 or 5 years. When I read your bio, one of the things that jumps out to me right away is how you spent some of that time in the Peace Corps. And could you tell the group a little bit about that, what some of the things are that you learned, and whether that might be something that someone in this room should consider?
Yeah, thanks for that, a fellow Badger. I could count on him. Wisconsin, car, where we all have cars. right next door to Minnesota. Right. Anyway, inside jokes. So anyway, so I do want to make the point, like John Hatch and I, my co-founder, we didn't start FINCA like right after we graduated from college, and I wouldn't necessarily recommend that path. I don't think it's a bad idea if first you acquire some basic skills. If you're interested in finance, go work for a bank for 5 or 10 years or whatever, but don't give up. If you have that fire in you and one day you want to run your own business and you want it to be a business that's really going to move the needle on some big social problem, and it doesn't have to be a financial social problem. You know, it can be, you can say, you know what, this injustice that we have in the world just can't stand. We got to do something about that. So start an NGO and pack it with lawyers and social workers or whatever, and you can develop a business model there. So, but the Peace Corps, if you're interested in working on the big international problems, like poverty and like, hunger, that type of thing, then yeah, the Peace Corps is a wonderful way to get out of this place, which is kind of, the exception. Like most of the world doesn't live like us. Most of the world lives like Naima, I mean, they're struggling in poverty, and if they're really skillful entrepreneurs or they're lucky, then maybe they can get out. But the deck is totally stacked against them. And I made a point of bringing my kids at least once a year to one of the markets. I remember taking my kids to Mexico. Wow. Says it all, okay. I mean, they'd never seen that, and it changed them, they became more sensitive to it, and they also understood, fortunately, why I did what I did. So it wasn't so hard to travel, huh?
Rupert, there's something that stuck with me after I saw an interview with Melinda Gates
Mm-hmm.
in relationship to the success and the failure of the Gates Foundation. We just found out, I mean, she came out, there's an article that last week said $1 billion from Gates Foundation into education, and it's one of their failures after $1 billion investment. But it's something that I wanted to ask you in relationship to some of these young ones who want to go into the social entrepreneurship, nonprofits, and everything else. How important is, and I heard it from Melinda, and I also would like to ask you the same questions. How important is for the people on the ground, the people that you're addressing and you're trying to correct, to own the actual process?
Mm-hmm.
Because that's what she meant. Like, the only times when we actually succeeded is just not when we're trying to express our need or our interest to help, but rather work with the people on the ground for them to own the process, for them to tell us how to do it and how to continue to grow and everything else. It's the only time when culturally, socially, everything else in relationship to the culture on the ground, they need to own it, they need to be engaged, they need to embrace it, and they need to run it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, I mean, it's the cultures of and the dynamics of the communities in those emerging markets. You really have to understand it to some degree to really work in it effectively. And you're absolutely right. Like in the early days, we were young and we all wanted to be heroes, especially in the Peace Corps. So we would go into a village and say, okay, and this is interesting because in the US, from the time we're raised, we're kind of taught a methodology to solve problems. And it's basically, okay, identify the problem, create a committee, raise money, and solve it, But I think there's a feeling of powerlessness in a lot of developing countries because they've never experienced that. They've experienced being helpless and vulnerable and exploited, by the powerful people in those societies. So, I mean, it's a wonderful thing when you go into a community and there's a great selfless leader. And I was lucky enough to see some of that in Guatemala. There were just incredible leaders in the indigenous community who would, I'd bring a load of vaccines so they could vaccinate their chickens. And the leader would be lining the people, come on, bring your birds. Some woman would bring 2, another would bring 5. And meanwhile, the vaccine's going down and down. I say, Alejandro, don't you want to do your birds? He'd say, it's not going to be enough. And of course, it was ironic because the vaccine killed all the birds because they already had Newcastle's disease. But, his birds were going to die anyway. But just the fact that he put all his people before himself, I was just really impressed with that. And if you get that kind of leader, then everything becomes easier. You let that person be your guide. But unfortunately, there's another type who says, okay, here comes the gringo. I can hear the jingling in his saddlebags. I'm going to figure out a way to bring this to me personally to increase my power and influence in the community. And then you have to kind of make a decision. Okay, am I going to mess with the power dynamic of that community? Because if I don't, I'm not going to accomplish anything. But it's a real art. But there's no question the most sustainable societies I saw when I was working as a consultant for UN Capital Development, which took me all over the world, including to South Yemen, while it was still under Soviet control. I remember a leader there. I went to see, because water was incredibly precious there. And so the leader of that community had developed this amazingly intricate and just system for covering the cost of keeping the well open. And he had a ledger where he counted every drop of water somebody took and every cent that they paid for it. And he was managing it in such a way that they didn't need help from the outside, you know. They dug the well, they managed it, they kept it working, because if they didn't, they would perish, you know, without it. And, you know, that was a great example of a responsible leader who did a great service for his community and led it in the right direction.
All right, I think we're running out of time. Basically, at this time, we're kind of like one down the whole thing. Thank you, everybody, for being here. I sure hope you got inspired. If nothing else, you learned something, and then definitely something to give you something to think about it. Let's give Mr. Scofield another round of applause. Thank you very much for being here, Rupert. Very, very much appreciated. So, thank you all. I will send you a little bit of after I assume everybody has registered to the registration. I'm going to send you a quick survey of how you found the presentation of today. Also, if you have any questions, that if you want to send them to me, I'm going to pass them on to Elizabeth, the assistant of Mr. Scofield, and then maybe they can address them also through the communication, to the written email communication. So thank you all for your time again. Have a great rest of the day.
Thank you. You made great Etonians. Thank you. You had me convinced.